Hi, my name is Silas Cutler, and I'm a principal researcher on the threat research team here at Census. Today we're going to be talking about North Korean IT workers and the BeaverTail malware. So jumping right on into our agenda. I'm going to start off by doing an overview of some of the historic threats that we've seen from North Korea, how those are structured underneath various government agencies within the regime over in DPRK. Then we're going to talk about IT workers, what the threat looks like, what the sort of flow of their individual attacks look like, and then we'll wrap up talking about BeaverTail, which is typically one of the pieces of malware that we've seen associated with some of the IT workers' activity. So, diving right on into the carnival of threats from North Korea. A couple years ago, Mandian put out this diagram in one of the reports on North Korea, and I've always found it a really useful one when talking about North Korean cyber threats, because it helps us to orient both where these units and cyber like APT groups sit under which various organizations, and using that to try and help gain insight into sort of like what their roles are in the broader picture of North Korea's cyber collection program. There's a lot that this diagram obviously leaves out. If you want a much better diagram and want to go deeper into some of the who reports to who, I recommend checking out the All-Purpose Sword. It's a paper that was presented at the 2019 11th Conference on Cyber Conflict, and it talks about North Korea's cyber operations and strategies, and I highly recommend it if you want to learn more about how North Korea lays some of this out. But diving in deeper to it, and making it a little bit easier to read here. So, as a quick sort of recap of how North Korea lays things out, I'll start on the right side. The sort of like two major power players for cyber activity in North Korea are the Ministry of State Security, which is the evilest version of the FBI with the spookiness of the CIA. And then the second department that typically we see cyber activity from is the Reconnaissance General Bureau, RGB. And they are more traditionally what we would think of in the West as sort of like the National Security Agency or GCHQ in the UK. So for the IT worker activity that we're talking about today, current assessments based on FBI sanctions, or excuse me, U.S. government sanctions and FBI indictments and statements, is that the actual individuals that are part of the IT worker threat are underneath the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, and then from under there, another sub-department. So cross North Korean government whole effort in order to achieve the activity that we've been seeing over the past few years. And we'll touch a little bit on how some of these groups intermix. But just an interesting note as well. So as I started going through and trying to put slides together for this, I went back and started mapping out a history of all of the various North Korean intrusions that had a significant financial outcome to it, with one exception being COVID phishing, and the COVID targeting, which occurred right around 2020. And there's kind of its own little area at that time as well. But I initially started looking at this because I was expecting to see and kind of see WannaCry as the first major incident, which then got their interest peaked and continued up from there. That hypothesis ended up being wrong, and interestingly, about a year before WannaCry put North Korea as a cyber power into household thoughts, the Bangladesh bank hack that occurred, in which North Korea attempted to steal an estimated over $1 billion, really was one of these first major financial incidents that I had seen of North Korean cyber-enabled intrusions. And it's interesting to follow because even though my starting point hypothesis was incorrect, the trend has moved in a steadily more positive direction of the North Korean regime pursuing larger and larger hacks against either cryptocurrency exchanges or major holders of online currencies. So throughout the pre-2020 era, there was a number of different attacks of this. So Ubit, Upbit, Bithumb, all of these breaches, all of which being single or double-digit $1 million outcomes for the regime in terms of fundraising. But after 2020, Axie Infinity, in which it was $500 million, the Ronin Bridge, which was another $500 million in stolen funds for the regime, show a very aggressive pace which has occurred. And there's still the smaller ones like Stake, which was $41 million in funds stolen by North Korea. But Bybit from this year at 1.5 billion, it shows a continual push to use this as a steady source of income. And as I tried to map this back to which actor necessarily would be directly involved in this, an interesting kind of picture started to come about, which was so when I looked at a group like APT43, which is under RGB, so should have a more traditional like intelligence type role and mission, it was interesting to see that they still, as part of their operations, there were tools that were connected with incidents involving cryptocurrency laundering, but not at volumes that would indicate a significant financial incentive, but enough of a financial incentive where it's laundering crypto funds or stealing someone's wallet in order to pay for server infrastructure or things to facilitate day-to-day attacks that they're performing against espionage targets. So it's interesting to see because they fall into the category of a North Korean group that's pursuing financially motivated attacks as part of a self-reliance philosophy, not necessarily out of a core we're funding for the regime. But that type of activity, like going after trying to execute a multi-billion-dollar SWIFT transaction, those are things we see from APT38, Temp Hermit. And so across the sphere, there is a continual targeting of cryptocurrencies as a means of both, one, self-reliance, but then in a more broad sense, for some of these groups, it is a clear financial goal as part of their operations. And we'll touch into that again in a little more depth in a few minutes. So let's start diving into the IT workers specifically. So to paint kind of as clear a picture as I can about it, the people that are involved in this, typically these are North Korean citizens. They've gone to school for computer science, development, learning to build applications. They have a background in IT, and they are technical professionals capable of doing this work. So as part of this, they sign up to work remotely, either in China, Laos, Vietnam, as part of this exchange program where they'll work using stolen identities for overseas companies, either doing gig work where it's Fiverr, I'm bidding on projects and freelancer in order to freelance, make money. Or it tends to be people that are actually going for full-time type employments where they have a skill set, a base of work that they've done previously, and they're out there trying to work full-time for somewhere. However, their goals are not always in line with the rest of the employees typically. It's not to say that's always the case, but often we see alternative outcomes as well. So this activity, it's ongoing. The FBI has been putting out fairly regular warnings about it over the past 5 years, I would say. In 2023, they put out some information about some specifics. The wanted posters started coming out. And additionally, at the time, they called out around 88 million that had been that they had assessed in terms of revenue raised by this program for the North Korean regime. And an important footnote I want to quickly make sure I note as well, which is that this activity isn't necessarily one group. It may be under a single department. I think 313th Mechanical Infantry Division, I believe, or not specific. Anyways, so it may be under one house, but it is not one group or one team. There are numerous of these type of cells essentially operating out of other neighboring countries to North Korea, and is something where people go work for a period of time. They have a quota to meet every month where they have to save a certain financial amount, and then go back to living in North Korea or send funds back. And either way, it's a rotating cycle program for them. So life for these people every day. So for folks coming into the program where it's their first time working overseas, some of these folks may find themselves day to day doing things like, not to say, but intern for a cybercrime type world would be. And a lot of that tends to be things down here at the bottom of, building synthetic profiles, going on Fiverr, looking for jobs that people can do that are interesting opportunities and easy to do opportunities. But then building things like GitHub profiles, writing generic programs that 5 or 6 people or 5 or 6 accounts can post to their GitHubs and all say, hey, here's previous work that I've built, things that can be used to essentially establish credibility for that persona when going out and pursuing jobs. And for most folks in tech, things like LinkedIn are necessities as well, because those become part of that overall resume that you present forward when applying for a job. So workers find themselves a lot of times building out playbooks, writing out back and forth interview practice skills. So for a lot of these, they have a fairly, what feels a lot kind of like a pre-career prep thing from a university or a high school to get folks ready to go out and interview for jobs. On the other side of it, there's also the sort of enablement services that aren't always visible essentially during an interview or when talking to folks, but these are things like VPN accounts, working with people in countries that they're going to be getting jobs in order to host things like laptops. That way their technology infrastructure always shows the same type of thing that they would expect from a worker in America or the UK or somewhere like that. Additionally, having things like PayPal account in order to receive money and get paid for work is critical. So, but once a worker has all of their starter pack that they need of having a profile, having the right tools, right equipment in place in order to go out and find a job, they have a number of different pathways they'll pursue. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the outcome of these tend to fall into a couple of different buckets. Most of them turn out just fine. Either employee comes and ghosts after a month or two, collects a salary. In more negative outcomes, there's the cases where the employees will turn around and say, like, hey, I'm going to go sell this data to a third party, or in some way acknowledge that there is an espionage component and that they're going to shake the target down for money. There's been some rumors of IT workers attempting to modify their salaries and to steal larger salary amounts. And in some cases, there's intrusions that we think are for long-term access, where this is a developer that the regime has an interest in the company in a longer-term capacity, and they may want that developer to live the life of the IT worker to live a life of a developer, where every day they're adding basic features and patches and simply being a level 1 developer. But that access is intended for long-term, where there may be a priority intel requirement about collecting on that in the future, and maintaining an access of having someone working there may be cheaper or more efficient than every 2 months launching a phishing campaign with 0 days in order to break into a target. But behind the scenes, even past the VPNs and the hotspots, because what we often see in terms of looking for and trying to hunt for this activity by looking for things like resumes or crawling through GitHub and LinkedIn accounts, behind the scenes of all of that, like, these are people, many of which went to universities in North Korea. They're well educated and they are well skilled in the work that they do. Some of these people have spent years building Mongo, React projects and modern websites and are fairly skilled at it. So it's never meant to diminish in any way their technical capabilities. It's what they do with the capabilities that becomes a threat, and the deeper role that they play and the why. So going into the why of this, like, why is North Korea conducting it, in doing this and running this as an attack? The main reason that a lot of folks have been talking about generally since 2022, 2023, has been that this is a major source of funding for the regime. In addition, especially when it comes to their weapons of mass destruction, so nuclear missile program and things of that nature. I think some of the theory behind that being cryptocurrency as a currency that is easy to move and to shift around, and especially for as a currency that is being collected by this regime in a clandestine fashion, lends itself to being exchangeable with other countries or people or resource providers that can provide those resources for the nuclear enrichment program and things like that. Secondarily, access as well. But I mean this beyond just having technical access to a target. I mean this actually fairly close to the third point, which is technology transfer. So for some of this, the being able to take highly technical professionals in their country, people that are their own domestic asset and resource, put them into positions where they're working day to day with people all across the planet, people in other countries, and learning what it is to develop at major corporations across the planet, enables those types of same skills and trade craft to proliferate back into North Korea's mainstream environment. So these people, after they work for a few years doing freelance overseas jobs, if they say do the classic return to Pyongyang and teach at a university, the same tradecraft they learn will be taught to the next generation of workers, which will make them that much sharper and continuously make them better. So let's start looking at these attacks a little more closely and dig in to actually what it looks like when a worker begins targeting a company. In my view, the most common and most successful, most frequent outcome from any engagement with an IT worker out of North Korea is going to be something like this, which is a successful payment confirmation on Fiverr, and then a 5-star review at the end. Prior to coming on to Census, I spent a lot of time looking at ransomware, specifically how ransomware groups interoperate with each other, how their entire ecosystem from access broker to encryption negotiators work. And in order for ransomware, and the same with the IT worker threat right now, to be successful, it has to actually deliver upon their core promises. One, if you hire me, I will deliver the product you want, which is the case for a lot of the IT worker activity, and much with ransomware, where it's your files are encrypted, and the only way you're going to get them back is to pay me N number of Bitcoin. I have to decrypt and prove that I can do it, or else the economy of ransomware falls apart, much like the economy and the gig economy would fall apart if no one ever delivered on what people have paid for, or if every single time you went on Fiverr, you ended up with a call from your CISO saying that your workstation got infected. The economy would fall apart there as well. So I had a couple of examples, but I ended up throwing most of them away because there have been a couple of cool stories over the past few weeks that I felt like were more relevant to some of these things that are going on. So first one that I wanted to highlight, so Bitso, they're a developer for LATAM cryptocurrency financial institutions, and they've been building a number of different resources to create interoperability between groups. So highly interesting target set for a North Korean actor, especially for any company that is in the crypto space that is engaged in exchange to exchange or any type of making something more accessible. These are going to be things that North Korean actors are going to have an interest in. So Quetzal, it's the threat team at Bitso. They have an absolutely fantastic blog, which I recommend to everyone that's interested in this type of activity, because they're out there pretty aggressively tracking a lot of this North Korean activity. So they posted a week or so back talking about an incident they had where, while they were surfing on LinkedIn, they received a cold call message from this individual, Wilton Santos, who's CTO for a cryptocurrency company that's building an application, and they just need somebody that was willing to help for a couple hours and do some freelance work on fixing some bugs they have. And would be incredibly grateful if they could find someone. So they reached out to Morrow, who's on the Quetzal team, likely not realizing where they worked, and asked if they could help, and sent them a copy of their project for them to take a look and then negotiate if it's something that they might be worth pursuing for some freelance work. The outcome of this was that copy of the code base that was sent over for evaluation contained a hidden backdoor in it. There have been cases previously when North Korea has gone after researchers where when a researcher opens the project, there's an embedded command in the actual saved code project that causes a malware implant to be deployed. In this case, it wasn't something quite as suspicious, but it was something that was stealthily well done regardless. So when you load the program up, the program loads fine. When you run the program, there's a hidden additional runtime that's set up to look like an error handler, which reaches out to a server in Finland. It uses a domain that looks like some type of cloud API, but what actually happens is it reaches out, whatever response it receives, it passes to an exec command and will just arbitrarily run that code. So to defender or somebody reviewing the code, it simply looks like maybe an orthodox odd library loading, or maybe a weird library loading that obviously looks suspiciously wired into an error handler. But it hides what the actual malware is going to look like on the other side. So when I was looking at the actual code itself, which also props to Quetzal team for sharing the actual indicators of it, because it makes it helpful for researchers like me and everybody else in the community to be able to validate their work and then talk about how awesome it is. So in this case, like looking at the code base that was sent, there's not actually any malicious functionality to the payload or to the backdoor they installed. So there's nothing that says, download this file or run this. It's just reach out and then run whatever you get back, which is great in terms of the OPSEC for the attackers, but more difficult for us. But it got me thinking, because something like this exchange, this LinkedIn style spear phishing attempts, this is likely something that happens 7 or 8 times a day. This is a regular hustle that the IT workers are using in order to spread malware in some cases. And to do that, you need either different code bases or you need resources to do it. So I started searching on GitHub for segments of the code that was in that in one of the project pages, and I found about 30 copies that were actually still up on GitHub. Only 2 of them actually had the backdoored code in them, so 28 or so likely benign. As I kept digging, the 2 that I found that were with full backdoors deployed, those had new control server information that I hadn't seen in the past. Additionally, there were 9 others that I found also having the same backdoor payload. So the 28 benign, these were 9 additional ones that were across other projects as well. So not the original code base, but additional similar type of kits where it's a web application. It is generally almost feature complete. Not something that's a full product on its own, but some small web application essentially. So there was a fairly interesting broad base, and this has been something even across even the individual profiles of a lot of the IT workers, is they usually have a fairly 10 or so projects that are up there, each of which being a Node.js project with database backend, so functional code and designed to be a project in itself. But it got me interested because I was like, where do a lot of these things keep coming from? And shouldn't have been as surprised as I was. But it actually turns out that a lot of things like Hacktoberfests and other hackathons to build out new library codes or new random projects become essentially feeding grounds as well for IT workers to be able to take some of those projects, because you'll have a couple hundred projects all in one big repository. They'll pull out individual projects, create them into their own little repository, and then claim credit as if it was something that they built. And then in some cases, they'll use those to add backdoors or wherever and however they need. So, yep. Secondarily, I'll also say another really important way for organizations to also be looking for this threat, and something that you can do at home, is to check your hiring platforms. So even something we're doing at Census is we're going through our hiring platform fairly regularly and looking for some of the patterns that both the FBI and CISA have talked about in their reporting. Some of these are also names and email addresses that we've received from other companies that we're collaborating with to counter this, and the threat is real. We've identified several that have applied. None of them have ever made it to an actual full interview from what I've seen, but they're out there. No one is immune. So let's dive into BeaverTail. As a lot of these attacks that we talked about a few minutes ago, from either backdoor projects being shared as directly with spear phishing, or through other methods, BeaverTail has been one of the common malware implants that we've seen IT workers deploying as part of the suite of negative outcomes that come along from hiring them. So BeaverTail is fairly interesting to me. It's fairly rudimentary first stage implant. It does some basic info stealer work, but its main purpose is to deploy a full an additional payload called Invisible Ferret. I will say that BeaverTail is a absolute joy to work on as a researcher. Part of this comes from it being cross-platform. Some of it is written in Python, some of it is written in JavaScript, so it makes it generally fairly easy to analyze and look through. Additionally, final payload from BeaverTail is an additional cross-platform payload called Invisible Ferret. And the focus of this is also information stealing. It'll also do things like check for crypto wallets. It'll steal saved passwords from web browsers. There's a lot of overlapping functionality between the two pieces. The major difference with Invisible Ferret tends to be that there's additional functionality specifically for remote command execution and deployment of remote desktop tooling as well. So, under the hood though, the actual sort of execution flow for BeaverTail is fairly straightforward. First thing it does, once a system is infected and a piece of malware is deployed, so in the case of running the project with a malicious backdoor in it, BeaverTail is what gets deployed by that server that the code base reaches out to. It runs that the initial outer layer of it, and we'll start this flow that we'll start into right now. So the first thing BeaverTail does when it starts is it builds an initial system profile. It'll check for cryptocurrency wallets, it'll pull saved credentials from browsers, all of that basic info stealer first stage download type behavior. Once it's built that out, compresses it, and then it HTTP posts it up to /uploads. So this is going to give the attackers an initial view. Okay, we compromised this system. Here's host name. Here's general system information. So after delivering that initial profile of the system, it moves on to get/pdown. So this is going to be another web request. This time, it's going to pull down a Python environment. So it's going to be python.exe and all the basic tools that a system is going to need in order to run whatever Python payload comes next. When I started looking at this, I've actually always had in my head get/pdown or Python down because it's downloading a Python environment, and pdown potentially may have been the author or developer's shorthand for Python down or something similar. And then finally, after downloading that Python environment, we go to the final request that BeaverTail is going to send, which is going to do another HTTP request, this time for /client/104 or / some other integer value. So 104 likely corresponds to essentially a build version of the malware. So this is the 104th build that they've done of Invisible Ferret. And so we can get an initial distant view of of the development as well by tracking those version numbers as well. So I got really interested in this from the perspective of being able to scan for it broadly. And something like post/uploads is a little less ideal of a scan. There's not a good reason to be posting data that often, especially not with scanning. But something like get/pdown stood out as a distinctively interesting case because it's a GET request, so it's simple, doesn't require doesn't cause a lot of impact to a remote system, and it should have a fairly predictable response each time. So as we started building out the threat module in the Census platform, BeaverTail is one of the first ones that we started scanning for. And we've had things like Cobalt Strike for years, but BeaverTail is a distinctive fun case because we could do the end-to-end testing of a lot of the things we were building out for the platform directly into what we would need in order to find this malware. So the screenshot on the right, above right, was actually one from 22nd of April where we sent a request for /get/pdown. This returned an actual response body consistent with what we'd expect from a archive zipped up Python environment. So this matched everything we were looking for. Headers matched. Additionally, you can even see in some of the strings, these are the same Python libraries. So it was a pretty good indication that we're able to identify this at scale. And just interestingly, one of my favorite things as going through and looking at control servers on something like Census is looking at what else is running on that system at the time that we were able to identify like a payload being served or another malicious fingerprint. So on that same host, also on 22nd of April, on port 1245, so 21 ports higher, if you went to the root of page for that, you would end up at another web page like service. This time it returned one called ladmin, and based on this running on the same system as BeaverTail, this is likely the admin panel that a North Korean IT worker or another one of the APT operators from North Korea would log into in order to evaluate and work with whatever data they've been collecting from BeaverTail over time. So from our visibility, we're able to track both where infected systems are going to be connecting and where attackers are going to be connecting to sort of round this out. It's definitely something we're going to chase forward, and we're going to be looking for a lot more malware like this to go after in the future. And with that, I'll wrap it up for today. Thank you for attending.
Hey everyone, my name is Morgan Princing. I am one of the directors of product management here at Census, and I'm excited to talk to you about our upcoming threat hunting module that we're releasing soon. I'm going to back up and tell a little bit of how we got into the space of building out the threat hunting module. As folks know, at Census, one of the things we most pride ourselves in is having the best, most comprehensive, and most accurate view of the internet. This has kind of been our bread and butter since our existence, right? How can we give organizations, governments, researchers the absolute best visibility? And we think about this in terms of our infrastructure that we continuously invest in, right? What do our actual scanners look like? How are we kind of making sure that we're getting the best perspectives and visibility into everything that is exposed on the internet? We also think about the data, what we make available, and the sources that we have, right? So not only are we just scanning, a handful of ports across common services, we're really investing in the depth of the protocol coverage, making sure that we're scanning for ports that are ports and protocol combinations that might not often be seen, and that we have historical data that can be used in investigations and certificates that can be leveraged to help understand ownership of various services across the internet. The third kind of tier that we're thinking about, right, is how can we continue to invest in the insights and context that is necessary to help, various users do their job. So these are various things, right, that we've really started growing into. And in the past year, we've made a lot of investment in trying to ensure that we can use our data to really help organizations best understand adversary infrastructure. This has been a use case for a while. A lot of organizations have used our data to kind of start to kind of piece this together and understand, what infrastructure our adversary is using on the internet. But we have made some strategic investments recently, hiring Silas Cutler and really putting together a formal threat research team that is dedicated to building out threat actor profiles as well as various malware signatures that are kind of inherent in our data, providing the context to start tracking a lot of this infrastructure. So we're excited to talk more about this. This is an area that we really are excited to grow into. Okay, so the threat hunting module, what does it mean? When we're thinking about the threat hunting module, like I said, we know that adversary infrastructure is so important to modern threat intel and how organizations can protect themselves from some of the most sophisticated threats in the world, right? So what we're really rooting ourselves in with this module is how can we give organizations, governments, the best visibility into that adversary infrastructure, allowing them to have the context they need to make decisions, the tools needed to investigate it, right, and the confidence to be able to block that infrastructure before attacks happen. So some of the key things you'll see with this module, right, is we have actually started to build in malware signatures into the product. So these are, detections that we have to track infrastructure as it changes across the internet, giving organizations a constantly updated view of what hosts, what web properties, what infrastructure are various threat groups using. This is maintained a lot by kind of the experts of the in-house teams that we've built together, but we also are ensuring that we've got kind of input from the community to make sure that these detections are really strong so your teams can use them. We've also invested, and you're going to see too, part of this is we were adding a lot of context. So there's descriptions, there's Malpedia and MITRE links. We've got details about affiliated actors that have been using various malware in the past, right? All of this is kind of allowing you to have more visibility into the kinds of threats that we're profiling. We also know that tracking adversaries on the internet is not always easy, right? And there's a lot of organizations who are doing this and are investigating some of, some clusters of activity that they might be monitoring now, but it takes a lot of time. So we've also built in a lot of new features and new workflows that are designed to help accelerate investigations, reducing the time it takes to find similar assets that look like a particular host you might be investigating, giving your team ways to validate infrastructure in the fastest way possible, and also unlocking a lot of our history to give you a more consolidated view of what hosts or web properties have presented certificates in the past. We're really excited about that. And then the last piece that we've been thinking a ton about, right, is how can we make sure that we're helping your organization build the most accurate detections? So there's a few pieces here. As groups are trying to identify, cluster, and group their own threat detections on top of our data, right, we want to make sure and continue to invest in various contextual hashes that can be used to track that data, things like JA4, JA3, JARM, right, banner hashes. But we also are improving some of the scanning as well that we are doing to give you additional visibility into places that we see a lot of malware running, right? We're adding new endpoint scans that start to track into some of the specific infrastructure that we know is common with some various malware families. So all of that is kind of ultimately providing the data needed to kind of continuously build out a lot of those detections. We've got an exciting roadmap on this as well, but we'll talk a little bit and go into a demo of what this is looking like as we launch. Okay, so as you'll see here, this is our new Census platform. We're really excited about a lot of the new capability that we have here. But one of the main areas that you'll get into as you start to think about the threat module, right, is we've got this new Explore page. And this is the really home page for all of the threat hunting functionality. We've got a map that starts to display the infrastructure that we see affiliated with various malware groups. And you'll see down here, we've got a repository of all of the various threats that we are detecting, as well as timelines of how that infrastructure has changed and the various infrastructure count that we see today affiliated with that assets. So let's go into BeaverTail. As Silas had been talking about, right, BeaverTail is a specific piece of malware that we can now kind of get some visibility into. And as we click into this, we can start to see, all right, we've got some assets that are dispersed right across various geographic locations. If I click in here, you can see we've got some trends of both how those hosts and web properties have kind of trended in the past 7 days across the internet. What's cool about this particular detection, and Silas had mentioned this too, is one of the ways that you can get really good visibility into BeaverTail is actually scanning a really specific URL endpoint that can help expose that detection. And Census, having kind of this really robust infrastructure, scanning infrastructure, we're able to spin up a lot of new scanners that can scan for particular endpoints, given the latest trends that we're seeing with malware. So as we release this kind of new scanner to look for BeaverTail, you can see that we're already starting to see a lot of changes in how that infrastructure is displayed day over day, making sure that your team has the latest IOCs and has the latest indicators of what hosts are actually being used and have BeaverTail running on them right now. So from this, you can do a few different things. One of the things you can do is start to build out a collection. A collection is a new capability that we have in our product that allows you to monitor any query and get near real-time updates on the changes to that query. So what this allows you to do is say, great, I'm actually going to monitor BeaverTail malware. Oops. Any new assets that track this query, you're able to configure webhooks, get those set up, and track both new and assets that no longer match that query to make sure that your teams have the most up-to-date infrastructure to use in various investigations or even to kind of build out various blocking that you might want to do to prevent your organization from interacting with those assets. So I can create this, easily build up a collection, and like I said, go to some downstream workflows, right, to start building out webhooks, track this over time, even share this with my organization. The other thing I can do from here is actually just start to explore all of the active assets that we see affiliated with BeaverTail. So you'll see we've got some new context on our results card that tell you about the threats we see affiliated with it. You can always go in here and add other labels or context, right? Let's look at BeaverTail that also has remote access, a service with remote access exposed, and really start to kind of build out your investigations. So all in all, this is kind of giving you some great up-to-date visibility on some of the kind of most relevant threats that we're seeing across the internet. Another use case that we start to see, though, is organizations saying, hey, let's talk about specific adversaries and actors. So if we go back to our threats page, move me out of the way for a minute. Oftentimes, let's say you're a large financial institution and Fin7 is oftentimes targeting your organization and organizations like yours. It can be challenging to know what are all the things that you need to be proactively blocking, or what is all the infrastructure that might be affiliated with Fin7 right now. We're hoping to make that a lot easier for organizations to do. And one of the ways you can do that is we've actually affiliated a lot of organizations with various threats, right? And this is based off research, various ways that our team has been affiliating. Hey, Fin7 in the past has been known to use XYZ malware in their attacks. So if I come in here and filter for Fin7, you can see I now have a list of some of the various threats and various infrastructure that Fin7 has been using. I can see where those hosts are located, and I can start to explore that infrastructure. In the case of, trying to explore this, let's say you're just looking at all of the infrastructure in China that has been, maybe affiliated with Fin7, you can come in here and also start to do things like build a collection to track that, or even go in and start to explore those in more depth. So we want to make that a lot easier for you and give you a proactive and dynamic list of infrastructure that you should be investigating. Another common workflow that we see is kind of the more traditional SOC workflow, where you might have an analyst that's just investigating a various IP. So let's say you're looking at this particular host. And the question might be, hey, is this malicious, right? You can now, with any of your lookups, right, you're going to start to see information, hey, that we think this actually is affiliated with Viper, right? We have a detection for Viper on this. And by the way, also, we see some remote access and VPN, indicators as well on this host. So giving your team kind of the quick ability to ultimately make decisions on what to do about this host. Now, this might also be something that your team might want to investigate further and say, great, we've seen some activity around this host. We actually want to understand, are there more things like this out on the internet? And that can be a challenging question to answer, right? What else is similar to this that we see on the internet? We've added this new Discover Pivots tab. And what this allows you to do is for every key value pair that we see on this host, we tell you how similar or how many other hosts on the internet share those same attributes. So this can save organizations, honestly, hours and hours of time to try to understand what is unique about this host, and are there clusters of other things that might be sharing a similar pattern. So if you go down here, right, it's not interesting at all that there's more than 3 million hosts that share this particular SSH, endpoint ID. That's not an interesting cluster to look at. But if I'm looking at something like this, right, the parse subject organization, or even the parse subject DN, okay, this is kind of unique, and there's only 149 other hosts on the internet that have a certificate with this exact subject DN. I want to know what those are. I can now easily just go click into this and streamline a lot of my investigations and searches. You can quickly see, all right, one of these hosts is affiliated with Viper. We see some other kind of interesting trends here. There's a lot of CVEs on these hosts, right? But maybe you want to ask a question about what ports do we see kind of that particular certificate run on? you can easily do this and start to get these clusters of activity, right? So let's look for the host services port. I'm actually going to filter this to only show me the ports where this particular certificate is running. And you can see, wow, some interesting things start to show up, right? This certificate is not just running on your basic 443. I mean, we have some clusters of activity here, but this certificate is running on a lot of unusual ports. So this might be something you all, the team wants to track, right? Maybe there's some activity here that is starting to look suspicious. We see a lot of high port activity. You might want to come in here, right? And again, build out something where you say, let's build a collection. Let's track this over time. Let's see how this is taking shape. You also can come in and say, all right, let's actually start to investigate what these specific, what these specific services are doing. So we're going to look at everything that's running on 2443. Let's particularly look at maybe this specific host. And one of the cool things that we've also started to introduce is the ability for your team to get immediate feedback on some of the services that we've got, did the data that we show in our platform. So here's the particular service, right, that we saw with that Ubuntu certificate. We've got some, context here. You can kind of pivot into this again, making it easy to do some explorations. But you can also initiate a live rescan to kind of explore this particular host. So if you want to click into this, we can immediately go scan and validate whether or not this service is still there. So we're expecting this saves teams a lot of time too, to kind of speed up their investigations and be able to get some immediate feedback on if that service is still there or if it's changed at all since the last time we've scanned it. That'll take just a few moments. But another use case we've also made available is we've got a functionality called Live Discovery. So Live Discovery will actually, you can give us a specific port to go scan, and we'll use our port independent scanning engine to go make a request to that port, detect what protocol is running on it, and return results. So if you've got specific hypotheses or are trying to track down, hey, I've seen various hosts in the past that have had this kind of configuration, you can come in and request that we go scan a specific port. Census oftentimes gets around to that data, but sometimes you want to have that really instantaneous, so we want to make that available to you. And what's nice about this rescan, right, is you can quickly view differences and get a nice side-by-side comparison of what this host looked like at a given time. And you'll see actually, since we last scanned this, that service is actually no longer there. So that's kind of helpful to know. All right, let's go back and actually investigate that particular certificate. So one of the other things we want to make available to customers, and we know, certificates can be a really staple in a lot of your investigations into adversary or malicious infrastructure. This particular certificate that we are investigating, right, we're starting to get some signs that this already might not be the most trusted certificate. Self-signed, right, and not trusted by, the 4 main browsers here. But one of the other things we want to do for you is give you context into the hosts and web properties that have presented that certificate in the past. So we have this new timeline feature, and this allows you to click into this and see what hosts have presented this certificate before, right? So let's click in. Actually, I'm going to pivot to this one because we've got a really great example with this particular certificate. You can see here, this is only, in the past month. Here's a distribution of hosts that have presented this certificate in this past month, right? And you can kind of start to see these patterns of like who's been using this for how long, what is the details that are going on here. And I'll back this up even actually through August 2024. We can get a little, 2024. We can get a little more detail about what's happening here. So this particular host has been constantly presenting that certificate. That's kind of interesting, right? But we've seen some patterns where, all right, this host was presenting it, it went offline for a little bit, it came back on for a brief moment, and it's coming back. So we automatically start to get some insights into these patterns of use. And then clicking into any of these bars, you can start to see some of the observation windows that we have for that certificate. So, hey, there was a threat actually that we detected on this host during this time when the certificate was present. There were 3 various services that we saw. This was particularly in an AS that's located in Hong Kong, and you can easily pivot into this historical host. So as we look into this, you can quickly go back and say, okay, at this given time, Census actually identified this as Cobalt Strike. So useful to kind of start to expand some of the ways that you are seeing threat data across the internet. We're really excited about a lot of this functionality. We're excited to get folks' hands on it, and like I said, we're just starting to go through with a beta program and expect to have this live in June of this year. So thank you for kind of showcasing this demo. We are really excited, like I said, to get this in front of folks. Thanks.